It's one of the most reproduced paintings in the world, and for good reason. There is almost nothing left of the original, yet Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper remains the most significant representation of the Last Supper in art history. Christ and his 12 disciples gather to break bread before he announces one among them is a traitor. It's this moment of drama, shock, and action that the artist captures in a work of intense storytelling.
With Leonardo, the most probably one of his most famous paintings, of course, is the great mural of the Last Supper, and it introduces us to a very fundamental theme in Western art, that is, in Western Christian art, and it is the Christian basis, that is, the religious basis of this art, that is a very important aspect of it. What Leonardo does is to create a scene that is filled with the standard iconography, that is the standard group of disciples around Christ at the Last Supper, that is the last Paschal feast before Christ's arrest and so forth. And it is it's a painting that has belongs to a tradition, a very strong tradition of such paintings in Florence, although this is a painting by a Florentine painter, Leonardo, but it's in Milan. It's also in terrible shape. And that's an important point because even though it has been relatively recently restored, Leonardo was experimenting with the medium. He was impatient with painting on plaster, that is, painting in fresco. And so he basically tried all sorts of other media on the wall essentially to create effects that were impossible to find in fresco painting, which is painting on wet plaster. And it was remarkably successful, presumably, but within his own lifetime, it was already peeling from the wall. And hence it's been a wreck ever since, repainted and repainted and repainted, and the recent restoration essentially took off all of the repaint with very little left, basically, because Leonardo's original it's just a bit of stained surface here and there. Nonetheless, it became the most significant representation of the Last Supper. And what he did was to bring together, as I said, the standard personalities, the characters, namely Christ and his disciples, around the table. But more beyond that, he created a space in which the orthogonals, that is, the lines that recede from the picture plane, parallel to the picture plane, essentially find their centric point in the head of Christ. So that there is and there's nothing remarkable about this, but it becomes extremely clear in Leonardo's composition. The focus on Christ, which is appropriate, of course, to the subject, is a kind of integral part of the very structure of the painting. The standard distribution of the 12 disciples in the paintings that preceded Leonardo's was to have them spaced along the entire table. One of the crucial aspects of Leonardo's composition is that he took the 12 and he grouped them into 4 single groups of 3. So he's taking the variety itself of the figures and creating a new set of structural values out of them, so that there are 4 groups of 3 within which each of the 3 components, that is, each of the 3 figures, reacts somewhat differently. And what they react to is critical. I mean, there are 2 things happen at the Last Supper. One, we might say liturgically, what Christ does is to declare that, as he points to the bread and to the wine, he makes it clear that the bread represents his flesh and the wine represents his blood. And the flesh, that is the wafer of the Eucharist, and we can see that more clearly, in fact, when we look at Raphael, but the wafer of the Eucharist and the cup of wine are the perpetual celebrations of the sacrifice of the body of Christ. So that this is the liturgical aspect of it as Christ reaches out to wine and to bread. The other aspect, the other aspect of the Last Supper is what we might call narrative. That is, Christ declares that one among the disciples will betray him. And what this does, of course, is to set the inevitable story into motion. That is, what he declares is that he will be betrayed and that body will be sacrificed. And this, of course, is all preordained, so it's the way in which it gets worked out that is of some interest, since his sacrifice on the cross is an inevitable part of the story of God sending Christ, that is his only Son. This is the basis of the art that we're dealing with. So that what Leonardo does is to create a certain kind of ambiguity, one might say. And scholars have argued at least ever since the German poet Goethe in the 18th century wondered about it. What moment is being represented here? I think that the answer is that both are being represented. I mean, there is no reason to say that it's one or the other. Christ is directly on center, and that centrality gives him a kind of liturgical focus. I mean, it's that liturgical aspect that will be then perpetuated in the Christian Mass. On the other hand, all of the reaction around him, with figures recoiling in horror, asking who it is who will, but I mean, this is a very aggressive gesture and it's close to Christ. Others recoil in horror. Others profess that, I'm not, I mean, they cross their arms to profess their fidelity, their faith. This is to the right of Christ is the crucial group. There are three figures there. In the center is the bearded old man with a knife, who is St. Peter. St. Peter is the saint who will be charged by Christ, who has been charged by Christ, to establish his church on earth. Peter, however, is also a rather aggressive character, and when Christ will be arrested, it will be Peter who will pull out his knife and slice off the ear of one of the constables. Leaning away from Christ is the young figure, always the most innocent, Christ's favorite, and that is John the Evangelist. And then joining them and recoiling too. I mean, he's leaning back with a very, very low profile. That is Judas. That is Judas who leans back and with his elbow knocks over the salt. This is the concentration of responses. Peter who will aggressively defend Christ. John, who is always the favorite, very often is shown asleep on the bosom of Christ. In this case, moves to the other side. And then the kind of brutishly profiled, dark visage of Judas, the betrayer. So that one has a sense of, as I said, of the variety of responses. Now, the responses to what? In some cases, presumably, it is the response to the announcement of betrayal. Or we might say that it is also equally valid to say it's a response to the establishment of the Eucharist, of the Mass, which is, after all, something that none of them had any idea of. That he is full knowledge of his impending death, establishes this perpetual presence on earth, as it were, of him through the wine and the wafer, so that this establishment of the Mass itself is something that could also provoke a powerful response. I mean, this, after all, is the beginning of the religion. That is, a religion in the sense of its sacramental, of its crucial, its central sacrament. So that the focus, I mean, to come back to the perspective structure, to the way in which these lines recede to the head of Christ, the way in which he is isolated against that central window, all of this establishes what we might call the liturgical focus of the entire composition. That plus his extended arms, the extended arms which are in anticipation of the extension of the arms on the cross. All of this is part of Leonardo, who was not a very religious man at all, and yet takes the religion itself as his subject matter. Because what Leonardo does more effectively than anybody else is to set his figures into dialogue among themselves. That we are called in to participate is a function of what we might call their rhetorical success. We want to know what they're saying. We're overseeing, as it were, their gestures, the ways, and this. Leonardo's constantly talking about how you should. Again, he's the first painter who really writes. He does write a lot about theory of art, but essentially he writes as though he's writing for young artists. People often say it's very Mediterranean, it's Greek and Latin and so forth, but the idea that these figures speak with their bodies. And this also is built into the Renaissance notion of art, which is ultimately related to Roman and especially Greek antiquity, that the body itself has an eloquence, that it's the body that speaks. Because there's an old adage that painting is silent poetry and poetry is loquacious painting. This goes back to antiquity, but the very idea that there are expectations that painting will be eloquent and be able to speak to us. And Leonardo establishes that, and then, as I say, Raphael will pick that up.